Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. In these interesting times. So I want to make an episode because I'm sure we're all dealing with different emotions. I think, it's pretty clear that the world is sort of split in two. And, it pretty much follows the line of those that are red-pilled pretty much all feel the same way. And those that are still blue-pilled are feeling all the same way. And this has been a very interesting time to see for probably the last, how do you pick the time? At least a couple of years. We've had a rapid acceleration of red pilling, waking up. And it could be red pilling to things that are in your personal life, let alone the world. And so because we feel a certain way about the truth, we are responding right now one way or the other about what's been going on. Now, again, a lot of you aren't in the United States, so part of this will just be, based on kind of what you think about your particular area. But I think it's important to remember that as much as we believe the entire world affects our little circle of life, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think in America, if you're red-pilled, you're very concerned that pretty immediately here, there's going to be some financial effects on your life that will make existing more difficult than it already is. And so I just wanted to get into it with you guys a little bit to kind of pull back and make sure that we gain perspective of everything that's going on as we choose to respond or not respond to any one particular event that we think we're seeing, right? Now, I've said so many things about, how I developed my own personality over the years. I just wanted to recap one little zoom in on the part of me that responds to this sort of thing. Because every year that you live, you're a different person. It's tremendous. I mean, it depends. It depends on if you're awake, but I assume you guys are awake. I've always tried to be, sort of the calm voice to any particular situation, although when it gets closer and closer to my realm, then you're going to get tested with your theory as whether or not you're a cool cat or whether or not you're going to fly off the handle. And so, I noticed in my own record, and I'm just telling you this just to set this up, just to set up the basis of this whole thing. I've had acute events occur to me like something happens, and respond in the same manner, very quickly, very little perspective, very reactionary, and that's something you do more when you're younger. As you get older, you kind of been through so many ups and downs, wins and losses. You kind of realize that things don't really change as much as you think sometimes, depending on what you're talking about. I've had those situations where something was bothering me, perhaps someone's behavior, and then that forks in the road. Sometimes I communicated, hey, I really wish you wouldn't do that. Or, if I've been an employer, you got to change your ways. Otherwise, you're not financially viable for my company. And then there's the other one where I failed to communicate anything, tried to hold it all in, and then I burst. And every single time any one of those three events occurs, acute event, a well-communicated correction I wish would occur, to a non-communicated correction I wish would occur, right? Read my mind theory. If I responded quicker, I always looked back and regretted something about that response. Even if I got 90% of it correct, that 10%, man, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have said that, or something else will haunt you potentially for your whole life, depending on who you might have hurt with whatever response you might have given, or even just change the perspective of people that you love. You realizing, gosh, unless I go over and, recall that event and apologize and correct for it, then you don't know what anyone thinks. And sometimes people are cool too. They're like, yeah, I do the same thing. So, you blew off the handle. I don't even remember what you said, but, you know, it was more of an emotion that I remembered than anything else. So sometimes you'll have friends and family like that. But, you know, I could go off on the whole thing of very specific stuff. The problem is that the data is coming in from all different areas. You can't really trust anything. And honestly, unless you are in it and participating in what happened in this particular country, then, which excludes a lot of you who watch from outside the country, then it's probably best that you find your happy place while things blow over. You still got to make a living. You still got to pay your bills. Being angry, well, it's understandable. It's totally understandable. You could be scared. You could be sick to your stomach. Or you could be totally ecstatic, depending on how you view things, right? So I've been giving this thought, you know, and I'm back ingesting stuff from some of my normal arteries, of which I kind of leaned away over the summertime, which has been important. It's been valuable. For me, the question of the world today is one of integrity. And I've done an episode on integrity before any of this stuff got hot. And I think that one of the kind of bizarre things is that we know that a bunch of things are being inverted in the world. Groups that preach anti-fascism are the most fascist groups that you've ever seen in your life. And it just seems strange. It just seems strange that people could be so, I guess, ill-equipped with history that they don't know that this is an old game, a really old game. But we know that younger people are, because they're young, typically less informed than older people. And then depending on how you grew up or got old, right? Because you can get old and not grow up. You can be either one as well. If you were traumatized as a child in any way, shape, or form, it does not have to be any particular way, but if you experienced something that was hugely traumatizing to you, there is this phenomenon, and it's associated with a lot of PTSD research as well, that the human mind in maturity ceases to metabolize, ceases to develop. And so one remains a child for a really long time, if not till your death, or until you work out that PTSD, either through trying to seek help or you just simply have an epiphany one day. We have to share the world with everyone in the world. And that's very interesting. In some cases, you might live in, say, America, where we have two gigantic oceans between us and a lot of the world. We get along fairly well with our neighbors. And so we might be concerned about things that don't concern us directly. Now, you may be a good person and you're like, hey, I want to make sure that everyone in the world has what I have. Now, that's a slippery slope, man, because you might find out very quickly that people don't want what you want. They think you're nuts. Maybe they think you're greedy. Maybe they I just need a car to go from A to B. I don't care if it's fancy. Maybe some people just eat because they're hungry, and that's just their regiment. They don't ever want food to be an entertaining experience. They just want it as sustenance because something else in their life is more entertaining. I make these points because I want to remind everybody that, we're all different. And we know that if your country is fairly large, then you have places in your country that are completely different than other places in your country. And in America, it is really astonishing how if a state gets large, it almost feels like you should split the state in half. And really, to give sort of a platform for unique expression more than any type of negative, I don't like you, you don't like me, so let's just draw a border here. That might be one of the catalytic factors in making another state out of, a single state. But sometimes it's just better you go, hey, if our state is really big and say one of the regions of the state is a coastal region that relies on fishing and the other part of the state is more inbound because their coast isn't very friendly, and doesn't have fishing or something. And so they may be more of an agricultural area, and so they should probably not share a vote because they need different things. And those different things, those different lifestyles might completely affect their religious beliefs, their laws, what they think should be legal and illegal. You don't know. What if an area has a super drug problem in the south part of the state and not so much in the north part of the state? So then the South is passing a bunch of laws that are going to affect the North. When the North may have some of that stuff, but they'd rather not their kids be in jail for minor drug possession. But if it turns out to be a whole statewide thing, well, people are going to go to jail for things that are really more of a hugely alarming problem in the South. If you're an American, I'll be interested to hear, and some of you are commenting on this. If you're not from America, what your perspective is. But I just want to address sort of the fundamentals of, I think, what red pill people are feeling right now. Because I've been talking to a bunch of folks, and I live in a pretty red-pilled group of people. The integrity issue is huge. And I think that the best way to describe it is, if the United States of America had an election and it went fairly normal, no weird anomalies, none of the bizarre stuff that went on, and boy, the list of, felony level stuff that's coming out is shocking. It's so massive. It's like we don't see crimes this big ever in the world. You don't have that many people committing a crime at that level. But let's just say we had something go pretty normal. The counts are normal. We saw, let's just say, and this didn't happen, but let's just say, we saw the same sort of fanfare for both candidates. We didn't see this, but let's say we saw gatherings of the same similar numbers. And then the election results turned out the way they did. And again, the numbers make sense with the amount of voters versus the amount of votes cast, because right now we're upside down. We have more people voting in the hundreds of thousands than exist. That's a bit of a problem, right? Even if your side won. The thing is I think most of us would just go, well, okay, wow, I guess I am a minority in my thought process. And so that's what we have to honor. You just do. You don't get to pout. And of course, the last 4 years, we've seen the other side not accept at any one day, for the more extreme people, the results from the last election. Even though it was pretty legit. There wasn't any huge reports of anything. In fact, the only things we caught were for the other side. It's so strange. It's so strange that we don't have yet, that I've read, and I believe I've ingested probably 12 hours of stuff in the last 4 days. And trying to be fair, trying to look at both sides of the game. But I haven't found any, piles of ballots for the guy that won, where someone was trying to throw away his ballots. It's all one dude. They're finding all this switcheroo stuff, glitches, and all that kind of stuff. I don't mean to rile you guys up if you're the winner. But what I want to sort of inject into this episode is integrity is big, man. Because integrity is a much more dangerous thing than I think people realize, who borrow every once in a while from the other table to get their way. Now, if you had other circumstances where you might have an actual tyrant who's actually crossing Europe and killing everybody, putting people in camps and things, then whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes to get rid of that. But that's what you call war. And in war, rules are sort of optional. I mean, no matter what Geneva Convention says, we know they break those rules all the time. Everybody has. Okay. But this isn't a war. This is just an election. But let's say that you borrow from the table of deceit to get your way because you think it's important. And what's interesting is you could sit in a group of people that believe completely the opposite that you believe. You'd probably find some people that respect you for your beliefs as long as they're well-founded and you've got a reason to believe because you probably have a completely different experience in life than they do. And so they're like, hey, I get your perspective. I didn't have that happen to me as a child, so I'm okay. I don't have that issue. I don't perceive a particular man's voice as this evil thing that you do. But you got touched by your uncle or whatever, and it feels the same. Or you have a weird childhood, and it was abusive. And so we get it. We get it. Anyone who even sounds like that, looks like that, just gives you the creeps, and you feel deep down in your heart that you know that person, even though you don't. And maybe even in that person's life, they've been able to use that little radar to truly find people like the other abuser and avoid them. Maybe even they took a second chance and got abused again, and they're like, gosh, it's that kind of person. I cannot stand that kind of person. I could respect the results of any election as long as it's fair, as long as there's no massive corruption. Now, when you have, millions and millions of people doing something and it's a competition, millions, we don't usually have that, right? We have the Astros here in America, the baseball team, were caught a few years ago breaking the code of the pitches. So as the catcher was signaling the pitcher, as soon as the dude nodded, they'd radio around what was going to happen, and they won a lot of different plays. Okay. Now, for everyone on the Astros, we'll use that as an example. You have a whole team now that may not have participated in that scandal. It seems like everybody did, but let's just say a few people would have preferred not to have participated. Maybe they're muscled by their manager to participate. And now they have to carry, they got caught. Now they have to carry that their entire lives. There's all kinds of negative effects that occur. They're the ones that you would expect, which is they get a scarlet letter by their community, by their profession. Those guys. I sat and watched the World Series here in the United States, and a buddy of mine said, I said, well, because I don't care who wins. And they said, I said, who are you rooting for? We're sitting down there smoking cigars. And he goes, well, they were the cheaters a couple of years back. Screw those guys. Let's not make them win. Let's go for the other dudes. Okay. But the more dangerous effect of siding with anything nefarious, anything deceiving, and that's what's going on, even if you won't pay attention to the news, you're like, who cares? We got what we wanted. Let's move on. Is that your subconscious? Or, as some of us believe, your soul, it knows what you did. It's like The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. The gentleman who buried, I think it was his wife or somebody underneath the floorboards, and then he kept just hearing the heartbeat, the throbbing heartbeat underneath the boards, even though it wasn't really happening. He couldn't shake it until eventually, I think the story ends where he turns himself in or goes nuts or whatever. That can happen to you. You'll be in a situation where integrity becomes a conversation way later, years later. And you will initially react in the conversation. Oh, yes, integrity is really important. Truth-telling is really important. But in the back of your soul, it's saying, not for you. Remember what we did? And it will eat you away. It's like when you get a college degree, the interesting thing about a college degree or any significant event in your life that is good, no one can take it away from you. You got it. It's an intellectual moment in time. It's not a possession. It was an idea of education. Same thing goes for these sorts of moral violations inside your brain. You got to make sure things are even Steven. And what's fascinating to me, and I said this in a few episodes back. Now, obviously, I'm on social media a little bit. I've tried not to get into it too much recently. But I have obviously several friends who feel one way and a bunch of friends who feel the other way. Okay. That's life. That's life. No matter what subject matter we would come up with, does God exist? Was Jesus real? You're going to get a bunch of people with different thoughts. People who weren't even raised around any of that stuff, having completely different thoughts. It's not even a yes, no. It's like, what are you talking about? The couple people that are most vocal in my particular circle, at least that I've noticed, I know them. I know their past. Their pasts were very rough. Very rough. And it's interesting that they're attracted to the results that seem to correlate with their past. One of my buddies has had to, in his mind, he has had to cheat to get everything in his life. He really didn't, but that's how he operates. He would hurt people, he would hurt companies, and he would hurt himself. And he is so aligned with this other group. And so it's a very interesting psychological, sociological experiment. We're viewing the macro and the micro as we ingest all of what's going on. What's frustrating for me is that I believe that there were people that could have run against our president from the other side that really, regardless if I absolutely do not agree with anything that they say, they were pretty clean people. They're clean as a whistle. Clean as anybody. And it would have been nice to see a legitimate newcomer get in there and represent. It would have been nice. Didn't happen. We have a person who has been caught telling untruths, shall we say, for decades, and not just small ones, but big ones that hurt people, that were sort of false valor sort of things, Amazing. But it seems that as easy as that information is to find, and as much as that information was presented to the public in arteries where I know they saw it, it's sort of it's a denial process. They didn't get through the Kubler-Ross phases of life with that particular information. But now here's another interesting thing, another way of looking at the whole thing. Because you have this media circus, which is trying to control our perception of everything. They literally are trying to dictate to each and every one of us, regardless of what side of the fence you find yourself on, this is who you should hate, this is who you should like. And this is science, and this is voting results, and this is who's president, who's not. I mean, they're trying to dictate reality to you, which is an old playbook. In the United States of America, when our money was real, at the beginning of 1913, and then by the end of 1913, it turned into fake money. There was this thing, there was an amendment to our Constitution, which was the 16th Amendment, which launched the IRS and launched income taxes for the citizen. Now, I think most of you know, but just in case you don't, our Constitution was written such that unless the tax bracket is even for everybody, which is a super bad idea, because the poor ended up paying a lot more, you can't collect income tax. It has to be an apportioned tax, which is a flat rate tax. Well, that's not what it is. And so even in their tax code, they've had to admit it's a voluntary tax. Problem is, they created this thug organization that will force you to do it. And then they inject the perception that it isn't an option. You must pay it. And of course, all the tax credits went to the corporations who were paying our taxes beforehand. Build industry and tax it, and the people have sales tax. That's about it. That's the way it was before. But in order to drive that 16th Amendment into the mind of all the Americans, when you create an amendment to the Constitution of the United States, all 50 states have to approve it. It's called ratification. In my research, up to 4 states said that they were held at gunpoint, I believe on Christmas Eve, to sign that legislation. And they did. And then they immediately reported that happened, and nobody listened. The press was just a newspaper at the time, controlled largely by the Hearst Corporation, which is now known in the history books as the founding father of American yellow journalism. Well, they got a train with a caboose, the last car on the end that's red, right? And they put Taft, President Taft, who was already out of office, who's the first Skull and Bones president, Woodrow Wilson, who was, I believe, a history professor, who was duped into the whole thing, and he even said so on his deathbed, Colonel Moon, who I believe is his handler, and I think William Hearst himself. And they toured all over the United States celebrating the 16th Amendment before it was ratified. And before these people said, hey, we were held at gunpoint, this needs to be investigated, this was a crime. But they sold it to the people as what? They sold it to the people as a Robin Hood formula, which was super sad for Americans. We were not very educated at the time. A lot of people were educated, super educated, and they were warning everyone about this not being what they said it was. They convinced the people, as I have recalled it through reading history through newspapers, that this was going to be a Robin Hood formula: take it from the rich, give it to the poor. So, of course, they signed up for it, not realizing it was the complete inverse. That's how we lost control of our money, and that is how we lost the first phase of massive control of our country. Okay. But now think about what I just said inside the metadata. The subtext of what I said was that the people who voted for it, or at least didn't contest its creation, they wanted something for themselves. They wanted something good. Now, if I say to you, take from the rich and give to the poor. Now, obviously, there's a form of government that does that. The end result is that there are two different people, most likely, at least in this. People want things for themselves, and most of us can find some sort of rationale where we want something for ourselves. But the other side of the game is they want something for someone else. They want the world, they see a poor person, like that poor person should not exist in this country as long as they're willing to work, and lift them out of the ditch with ancillary money that we have around. If everyone just donate like a quarter, then this person could get on their feet again. Even if you have neighbors and friends that are just driving you nuts, the end result is that we want the same thing most of the time in society, in any one realm. We just disagree about how to get it. Even within paradigms that are supposed to be unifying paradigms, people don't believe the same thing. Religion. Pick any religion. I'm only going to touch this for a split second, so don't worry. We know that there are people that believe the Christian Bible is a 100% literal book, and there's others that believe it's more metaphorical. Well, I've seen people go to blows, verbally, I should say, over those differences, even though both of them would say, if I asked them privately before this encounter, are you Christian? Oh, yeah, totally. The other person would say, oh, yeah, totally. But they would punch each other in the face if they had the chance, because they're angry that the integrity of what they believe is being disputed. But what drives anger in the first place? Because there's no doubt that there's anger out there. Suffering usually kicks off anger. You don't have enough money. You don't have enough opportunity. Here's a newsflash for everyone listening. Life is a bitch sometimes, meaning it's difficult. And that's part of being alive. Remember what I said about video games many, many years ago. I was in the video game industry off and on for 25 years. Sometimes running my own company, sometimes working for the biggest companies in the world. And I was privy to tons of test cases, testing, QA sessions, and just acceptability tests where we would take a bunch of conference rooms, bring in a bunch of players from local groups of people, and they got to play the alpha, the beta, and then the final candidates, final release candidates. And we watched something fascinating occur in sort of the off hours, which was that we would find, and this happened to us, that happened to me, you'd find a game you really love. I don't know, Duke Nukem back in the day. And we would turn on God mode. They would release a release, or at least release the code to type in to get yourself in God mode. And what's God mode for those of you who don't play video games? Well, it's usually one bullet is a kill. No matter how many hit points the other person has, you could shoot an elephant with a BB gun and it would fall down dead. It's pretty fun for about 15 minutes. Some of the God modes would allow you to fly around the world, even though there's no flying in the game, which would add a whole dimension to the game where, there's parts of the buildings that you'd normally be hiding in to do sniper moves. And now you can get to new places that are just there for your viewing pleasure and not meant to be a part of the game. Everyone plays for about 15 minutes. Hardcore player who's in denial about how much fun they're having might get to 30, maybe, but they've burned out their soul in terms of loving the game. Here's what's weird. Once you experience any God mode of a particular game, we realized that the frequency of which the player would go back to ever play the game again dropped to damn near zero. Meaning, maybe Electronic Arts, we used to go in and play games that didn't have God mode for 14 hours straight. And that's no joke. We get there at 10 in the morning, play till midnight, and the only thing we did was have the pizzas delivered to the front door. So we might have lost 30 minutes going downstairs to catch the pizza guy at the front gate to get the pizza inside, and then we'd play and eat around this, and we'd scarf, Like Command & Conquer didn't have a God mode, so we'd play it forever. But then we played like Duke Nukem, Doom, all the first-person shooters. This is old stuff in the 90s, right? I noticed that we played Doom for probably about a year. But then someone got God mode turned on and played it, and we all played it on God mode, meaning, it was funny at first, I could shoot you with one bullet and you die. But man, once we were done with that, we felt like we had experienced all things at once, and there's nothing else to experience. So if you're prone, or if you've ever in your life been sort of angry at the universe, and we've all done this, okay? Sometimes you might, yell at God, or you might just kind of yell at the room. The deal is, without these ups and downs, you're never going to recognize what is up and what is down. You'd just be sitting in stasis mode. And that really comes down to a lot of fundamentals. If you got everything that you wanted every time you wanted it, boy, life would be boring. Which is why a lot of the psychopaths that run this planet are in that mode. They go to a whole new level immediately when it's like you've done everything that you could possibly do. You've been every place on earth you want to be. If sex is your thing, you've had every form of that stuff, plus those guys do the Epstein stuff. And then the next thing, I guess that's tough, is running the world, because controlling people is a very difficult thing to do. So it becomes a game. And we're always challenging them because we have the human spirit in our system. Everybody wants to be free. Everybody. But there might be more factors at play in this game. We know that the future for young people has never been more bleak than this last 20 years, I would say. Started showing its colors in the 90s, but 90s had an internet explosion. But a lot of industries started declining as this 21st century turned the corner. And that's without anyone blaming, shipping jobs off or any of that kind of stuff. Way before any of that is a reality. Education just got worse and worse and worse, didn't it? Instead of going to school to get education. You went to school to get a paradigm of belief that doesn't equal any type of job whatsoever. Professors that are supposed to be teaching history are teaching their political bias onto the students. Instead of studying reading, writing, and arithmetic, engineering, whatever you do, they were taught all kinds of bizarre self-perception doctrines to confuse them. And it depends on how worldly an educator is, meaning how much of the real world have you ingested? How old are you? Did you ever work in the private sector? How much do you know about reality? How many people do you know that have been around the world? When you start your own business, for instance, boy, you get schooled real fast whether or not you know what you're talking about or not. You know, I've been privileged to be in, it's really interesting. Typically what happens in life is that you start off small and you work your way up to a big skill set. I was very fortunate to start off in big situations, big negotiations between gigantic companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, sitting in the room as a contributor, but not as anyone leading the negotiation. So I got to watch a bunch of amazing stuff happen, watch some true just shootouts between people across conference tables. I mean, epic stuff. And so I got baptized in fire so that when I moved out of that one negotiation, that one massive one, I could immediately take on negotiations within Electronic Arts. I watched AOL and EA negotiate a giant deal in the late 1999. And it went on for about a year and a half, the negotiation. It just kept going and going and going. Well, I was 29 years old, and I got to do the deal with Pepsi. I got to do the deal with Starbucks, you know what I mean, personally. They came to me, and we negotiated those little scratch-offs or underneath the bottle cap thing, the codes. They would translate to game credit or whatever. So when I formed my own company and had to do negotiations for $1 million deals for me and my employees, I was there. I had tons of experience. When I approached Steve Jobs to do some deals with EA, I was ready. When he sent his whole team to me and we worked together for 2 years, I was ready. But those opportunities aren't around anymore, you know. Mine was super rare, of course. But today, when I look at what it took for me to accomplish what I have accomplished in my life, a lot of it was self-educating and getting as smart as I possibly could. And believe me, I came to California probably the most illiterate human being that I know. I couldn't spell. I couldn't write properly. I could speak to you similarly probably the way I'm talking to you now, but in terms of putting it on paper, you know, when I chose to be a writer, it's when I exposed the inside of my brain on paper and I was able to read it back and go, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And then I've had a couple close friends way back in the early 90s, you know, kind of come up to me and say, you know, I don't think you know how to spell. And because you don't know how to spell, you're saying words incorrectly. You're transposing words in your emails. And the dude was, this one guy was named Rick. He was so correct, so utterly correct. He changed my life with just a little statement. And I guarantee you, if I walked up to him today and said, Rick, you know, there's one thing I want to thank you for, that moment when you walked over to my cube and you corrected my spelling or told me I had an issue, he wouldn't remember it. So when I talk to students today, and, you know, it's like my kids or my friends' kids or just people out in public, and we start to talk. Maybe a kid comes in to smoke a cigar or something. Sometimes they've got it all, and a lot of times they don't. Absolutely wonderful people, hearts of gold, probably do anything for me on the second day I knew them. But they've been injured by the system. And we know this is not a new thing. Again, Charlotte Iserby's gigantic book she wrote in the early 70s, or started to write in the early 70s, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, is a Bible of their playbook. Okay, so there's a force that, depending on who you are and what age you are and where you live, It'll either work against you or probably work against you. I'm trying to think of somebody that might benefit from such a thing. You're not in the class structure that benefits from that sort of thing. Our country is divided, and I think the ability to apply oneself to life. What's really fascinating, again, to me, is that there is a certain type of person that believes one particular way, and there's another type of person that believes a different way. And this is just me being honest with you, the amount of people who are happy, employed, have lived a pretty good life, who I would trust my kids with during a babysitting session, tend to align with me. When I ask the other group, and I've been doing this little experiment, about how much this other group shares their life with their group, whether or not they do babysitting with their friends and that kind of stuff, it's been profoundly, oh, no way. I have an outside group that does that. Yeah, now my friend's kind of weird and da-da-da. Get a lot more of those stories in the other group. And it turns out to be sort of that disenfranchised group. They're not necessarily disenfranchised with anybody who's running for office. They could take that guy out of history and they would still be there doing the same thing that they're doing or not doing the same thing they're not doing. And they would feel a very similar thing. One of the things I'm trying to track, and there's some profound cases for this, when I talked about the couple friends I have that I know have had really rough lives, those rough lives were related to their parents not being available and just not knowing how to parent very well. They would be the first person to tell you that. That's how I know their history, because they shared it with me when times were a lot different about 25 years ago. Parenting is being pushed aside by groups that are winning, even if it's by illegitimate means. We have a big group in America that is burning down buildings and doing a bunch of bad stuff. And you go to their website and it tells you that they don't believe in the nuclear family. Oh, as if it's not bad enough already. You're going to then shatter it apart. Huxley's Brave New World, if you read the book, it's all based on a lack of parents. There's no parents. The kids hang out with the kids, and who knows where the parents are. Destabilizing the human condition allows a problem to exist that has been manufactured. And then there's obviously a pretty typical range of reaction because the person's hurting. The person doesn't have the knowledge to literally do the basics of life in some cases. Now, some kids are exceptions. They're brilliant. And again, someone who starts to succeed in business typically starts to experience more of the world. They're more enlightened day to day, and they tend to reject anything that would have any paradigm that if they analyze the paradigm and they say, boy, if I had done that, I wouldn't be successful. And they immediately start rejecting the paradigm because they realize if that ever got into their circle, they wouldn't have succeeded. And as they have children themselves, they keep those paradigms as far away from their kids as they possibly can because they want their kids to not be living in the basement at 35 years old. So I think that there's a derangement syndrome that has now been officially marked as a true syndrome in the United States of America. I think it's spread all over the world, unfortunately. I think it has to do with a cocktail of events that either did occur or did not occur and should have occurred in a person's life. I've got friends of mine, how do I put this as gently as possible and as double-blinded as possible? I have two friends of mine in this world that sort of are angry at society and definitely are very happy today and will be very upset if the investigation into the fraud results in a reversal of what just happened in the United States. They'll tell me about their childhood and they'll say it was horrible. Good up to a point and then horrible. And then I say, okay, well, tell me what happened. You're offering the thread for me to have a conversation with you about it. And both of them have said the most remarkable thing to me. They say, I don't remember my childhood. Well, first of all, what I didn't say was, then how the heck do you know it was bad? But then they answer the question in the second statement when I say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't? I mean, like, nothing? Like, what do you remember? And they say, it's all black for me. What's interesting is these two people do not know each other whatsoever and will never meet on this planet, ever. But they both describe their past in the most surprising way. They describe their past as black. Let me know, have you ever heard of a friend, or do you have it, where you have a black spot in your memory? Now, you might think, or you might ask the question, how much time are we talking about here? Is it a one particular year of their life, a month of their life? They're talking about almost a decade of their life just missing. And so I see some pretty, unique behavior from them in life. And I go, are you sure something didn't happen during your childhood in these black boxes that are your life? Always talking about black boxes, right? Go see my Egyptian episode if you have questions about that. But couldn't have something happened in that era of your life? Oh no. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm not going to push because I'm not a jerk. But it's pretty apparent to me that it did happen. They got disenfranchised with life because something horrific happened to them. I am assuming under all circumstances, it was not their fault. Of course, they were children. Something abusive occurred. I've even had one of these individuals, one of the two, because I know one longer than the other, introduce me to other friends, in one case, a partner. And this partner had just gotten out of jail and was sort of feeling about the world the same way as she was. And I was told, I didn't ask the question. This was the other thing. This is the first time I ever heard this, way back in the 90s. There was a big sales pitch of how wonderful this person's life was when they were young. And then it turned out 3 or 4 years later, in some just ancillary conversation, that indeed there were really negative, traumatic things that occurred to this person when they were young. Okay. So the Kubler-Ross thing is about anger, denial, negotiation, and acceptance. What I find is that the group of folks that are more similar to myself, which I consider all the OG listeners, is that you're strong people. If something is messing with you, you deal with it. You may not come up with the solution right away. It might take you 20 years to figure out something that's just making you behave a particular way, but you're on it. You know you got this thing about you that maybe no one else even notices, but you do, and that's all it takes, and you deal with it. Doesn't mean you don't procrastinate in certain things. Doesn't mean you have a lack of phobias or something. You're not perfect. But where it gets big and starts to interrupt your life, you sort of just look at it and you get totally focused on it. You're like, okay, it's your turn to get your butt kicked out of my life, because I like controlling my mind, my body, and my experience while I'm temporarily human. My interesting thing, I've told you that I have mentors that are completely opposite. I at least have two mentors which believe completely the opposite thing I believe, at least last time I talked to them. I know one for sure does to this day. And the concern that I have moving forward is, I don't mention anything topical or, I don't scratch wounds or anything in someone. So if my side had a clear victory, no voter manipulation, none of these reports coming in, where now we're looking at damn near, one county had a glitch where it gave back 6,000 votes and changed who was winning. And that software is used in every county in which is about 40, 50 counties in a state, and it's been used in 35 states or more. They're still investigating. We're talking about tens of millions of votes that went the other way due to a glitch. So when I deal with my friends moving forward, I just will leave that subject matter out of the game. Even if I had won, I just wouldn't mention it. We're getting together for completely different reasons. 3D modeling, special effects, writing, all that kind of stuff. I don't need to be a jerk. I don't need to gloat. You think about it every once in a while. Wouldn't it be kind of funny to do that? And then you realize how much you'd be hurting another human being at your own, only your benefit. It just doesn't make any sense. I know that one of my colleagues, mentors, he and I'll be just fine. He's pretty empathetic about other people's feelings. But the other one is going to be tough. He is a gloater. And so let's just say that we figure out a way to get along and it's just no problem. And I think this is going to be the case, obviously. But what if, there's a little bit of a rift there? The thing that's I got to walk the walk, right? When I tell you to self-educate and get yourself a new career, if the one you have is not paying the bills, you may love it, but it's not paying the bills. You got to go find a new career. I got a brand new career this year. I took 4 years of, about 3 years of using Blender 3D to accomplish tasks in my startup where I would model a 3D screen or model something to go in the 3D screen in 3D. It was kind of a little hobby on the side. And this year, I spent 8 months pounding it into a professional level career and I'm pounding on it every day. It's part of my deadline that I'm working on right now. So one of the other things is that I try to purge out of my life people with no integrity. Well, you can't do it this time. It's okay, in my opinion. In fact, I think it's actually been extremely valuable and rewarding in my life to have friends that always represent the other side. And even throw around slurs and throw around, orange man bad comments and stuff. Hey, I got thick skin. It's good. You're expressing yourself. I appreciate that. But to lean on a very fraudulent election and represent that as non-fraudulent, okay. It was bad enough that a pedophile family, because now both the father and son, the son is so caught dead to rights, uploading porn of having sex with his niece on Pornhub. I mean, I got friends on the inside of Delaware, and they've seen that computer, and they know it's real. They've seen it. Why it's been sitting in the FBI for 1 year unprosecuted is heresy, man. You realize, I think most of you know, if you were to go to some weird site and you download something to kind of use at night when you go to bed or whatever, and it happens to be a minor in that video, they can raid your house and you'll go to a pedo camp. But if you're the son of a prominent politician, it doesn't get prosecuted, it doesn't get mentioned. And we know some royal family members that have been proven, to be inside Jeffrey Epstein's little island resort. I think if the post I saw today is true, they said that London shot up a bunch of fireworks this year to celebrate the outcome in the United States. I don't know that this ever happened in history. Maybe it has. I never heard that ever said. But what does this election mean to that family over there that runs a giant portion of the world? It means that their son will be free and clear because any investigation that's going on will be absolutely stomped. The day after inauguration, guaranteed. Full disclosure, from my opinion of this whole thing, and this has really just come to me in the past couple days, is I'm fortunate. I've lived, if a single professional career that is amazing is considered a life. You had a life being a lifeguard, life being a race car driver, all that kind of stuff. I've lived 4 to a dozen amazing lives. I know what I have done. I've left my mark here and there, blah, blah, blah. And it's not a boasting statement whatsoever. It's just how I observe my life. And, okay, so if things were to end in any way, shape, or form in the next 10 years, in the next whatever, 4 years, who knows, right? I mean, if I died tomorrow, it would be like, okay, well, whatever. I could meet God, and he's going to be like, wow, that was a good run, man. You upped your record. Hopefully. What was ironic was that one of my friends, one of those mentors, was talking to me on the phone about his concern for his grandchildren's future. And I was like, really? You might want to pay attention more to the facts about the world than what these media organizations are telling you. Because the other thing is that the one that I think I'm going to have no problem with, when he speaks his own words. He might believe everything that I don't believe and vice versa, whatever, but he's speaking his own mind. It's really nice. That's why it's very easy to have conversations with him that are completely different than what I believe. But the other dude can't muster a sentence that hasn't come out of some mass media product. And so you kind of just, in your mind, you chalk them up to, well, you're just that kind of guy. You don't think for yourself, which is why you're in the predicament that you're in. What is still unknown at this point, and it's sort of a weird slippery slope, is, there's a lot of older folks that in America that are in my circle that are saying, they wish it had gone a different way, and they wish that we weren't dealing with a bunch of fraudulent stuff, and then we got to go fight it in courts and all this other stuff. But they're still sitting there going, we'll survive. We've had this kind of situation in the past, and they know they're red-pilled to death. They know all the stuff that we know. They sit and watch it. And one of my buddies watches more than I watch. He watches everything. Not because he wants to, but because he has to sit and smoke cigars and it's on TV. So there's an interesting piece of wisdom there. Now, for those of us that have studied more aggressive programs being incubated in Europe and spread all over the world, one that has an agenda number to it, we're not quite able to swallow that piece of wisdom as easily as in previous eras of life, because it seems that this year is the warning shot across the bow. Do what we say, or you're all gone. We'll just unleash something that's really, really deadly. And no mask is ever going to help you. They really didn't help you this time around, but it won't help you no matter what. And again, there's all kinds of methods that they could use that would be a one-day solution, respectively, compared to today. Not literally, but, we're talking like 30 days. They could easily wipe out the whole world, including themselves. They have, weapons that are so good they could take out a particular race. They could take out probably somebody with blue eyes. I mean, they've got it down. We have lost control by allowing our governments to use the old excuse of national security, which again goes back thousands of years. They didn't say that exact phrase, but there was a similar phrase. Again, I mentioned this episode of, was it Star Trek Next Generation, where Picard was challenged with that exact statement in an episode, and he quoted, I think back to the 1640s, some piece of literature that was that exact thing. He says, oh, that's the famous phrase. This is how you can hide what you're doing to your people, and they don't rise up against you, because they also believe in the phantom threat that if what some other group is doing is revealed, then everyone gets hurt. This is how BSL-4 labs are created. Now, let's just say there were no governments in the entire world, and no major corporate overlords or anything. We're just kind of all living peacefully. We know that there are psychopaths out there that were abused as kids, transferred that abuse to their actions. They've got money, because usually a neurotic person can get things done. That's what's interesting. So when you have a neurotic musician, you get a bunch of great albums. When you have a neurotic scientist, hopefully that's like Tesla, you will get amazing inventions that, help the world. But once you have a psychopath that is also a genius, then you're in trouble. Because without governments and without corporations doing things, individuals do things. They do it all the time. So man is flawed. We all know man is flawed. But we'll say that statement, that little catchphrase, and we don't really lean back on the idea of what it really means. What does it mean that man isn't perfect, man is flawed? All right, well, how about this? You exist on a planet with billions and billions of very imperfect beings, including yourself. Now, we all know there's a degree chart. You're imperfect to a particular level, hopefully low. And then you will find folks that are really broken, trying to get back at the world. The sentiment gets to a point when you get hopeless, you'll start burning the world down. So I mentioned to you guys the other day, we back up here, the episode of Twilight Zone where the little kid wished everyone into the cornfield. And I just mentioned that to you. And then I've been working on my 3D project, and I just marathon Twilight Zone. I'm going to go do that exactly after this episode's over, even though it's 1:30 in the morning right now. And I noticed something because I was like intrigued. I was like, oh, there's the episode. Let's just kind of watch it and digest it because I just mentioned it to you guys. And I had mentioned to you the Kanye West comment about him saying that slavery seems like a choice to him because it went on for so long that in his mind, the slave should have rebelled and never put up with it. That's his opinion. I'm not qualified to comment on that. But in this Twilight Zone, there's a moment of that exact thing. And I thought it was fascinating that it all kind of came together in one episode, but I forgot that what he had said is actually in that episode. And it gets to the end of like the last 10 minutes where all the magic happens in a Twilight Zone. And it was somebody's birthday party, and this dude was given a record, which he was not allowed to play because the little kid didn't like singing. I forgot about this. And then he was given a bottle of really good brandy. And because the kid had wished the entire world away, it was just like, I don't know what it was. It was like this town just on the surface of the planet. They all knew how many brandy bottles were left. And this guy is drinking. And he's kind of minding his own business in the corner. And his wife comes up to him. She's a little concerned that he's going to get drunk and he's going to say something. And the kid's going to do something bad to him. But there was a moment where I think the guy that got drunk actually mirrored a lot of our personal takes on that situation. His wife comes over and says, hey, honey, maybe you shouldn't drink so much. And he's just like, what? I'm not doing anything. And she keeps pushing him. And he's like, what? I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here enjoying my brandy. Get off my back, You're just nagging me, man. And so then he gets a little louder because she's nagging him. And then the kid turns around because they're playing some music at a piano. The kid's just listening. But, this dude's being loud, so the kids notice him. Oh, man, it starts to ratchet up the heat on this whole situation. And it gets to the point where no one will leave this guy alone. Everybody, it just was this chain reaction. Brilliantly written, man. Let me just tell you. And finally, the guy's just pointing at the kid. And he says the kid's actually got a little bit more patience than they have sort of rumored him to have, where he was saying, you're thinking bad thoughts about me. You better stop having bad thoughts about me, because if you don't, I'm going to do something bad to you. And so the guy doubles down. He's just like, I am sick and tired. The metadata behind it, the subtext is he's sick and tired of this whole thing, and he's just going to go for it. One of those reactionary situations because he's drunk. And he says, yeah, you do that. You focus on me. And maybe someone in this room has enough guts to hit you over the head while you're thinking about me. And it's full of all these adults, plenty of objects they could have picked up and slammed this kid on the head and gotten rid of the whole nightmare. But no one had the guts to do it. The dude gets turned into a jack-in-the-box. And then they beg him to move him out to the cornfield. And you watch it, and you struggle depending on what kind of person you are. We have these kids all over the world, don't we? And I'm not even talking about the people that are super happy about the election in America. They're victims of the kids. They've been turned into things. They've been brainwashed. They've got this lack of history. Not bad people, just they haven't had the path that you've had, and so they're different than you. And it just so happens to be that, I mean, think about it. There's two groups in the United States. I don't know that there's a third. And if somebody told you you're the richest person in the world, or you're part of that family clan, and you've been running the world for a long time with people, and if somebody sat at the dinner table and said, that really long dinner table, you got to shout to hear the other side of it, right? And they're like, I'm going to, it's like, what is it, that Mortimer and the other guy from Trading Places, where they swapped Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd was the big stock market investor guy, and Eddie Murphy was a homeless dude, and they switched him, and they perfectly turned into each other. But imagine you're doing one of those little $5 bets. I guess it was $1 bet. And they said, I bet you can't galvanize the United States of America into two very specific groups of people, where one group really hates the other group, and the other group's just confused while the other group exists. But you can't make a third group. You know, take that bet? Someone takes the bet. And if you're sitting there, a fly on the wall, and you went home that night, and you're like, man, these dudes just made a bet. Oh, what's the bet? Oh, we're going to make two groups in the United States. You would think that's impossible. There's too many people in that country to create two groups. And they did it. They frickin' pulled it off. Isn't that amazing? So part of it, if you just pull back and you really say, you know what, I'm not a human being. I'm really a soul being, a being of light. I just happen to be here in this particular dream, which has got 5 recognized senses. You can look at life a completely different way. And another friend of mine, one of the two guys that has kind of a weird childhood, who's now part of that other group, he had posted something about religion, and he was sort of, taking a huge dump on it, and he was very, very happy that churches were being forbidden to worship. He drank the Kool-Aid. Again, he can't allow someone else to have a belief that's different than his. He's bought Kool-Aid that somehow we have religious crusades still, and they're walking into towns like his and killing everybody, whatever weird rationale. He sounded a lot like George Carlin in the last 25 years, or 15 years of his life, I should say. But he talked about it, and so I said, hey, buddy. I said, well, I didn't say I was thinking it, but I said, morality. If we were to get rid of all the churches in the world, where do we teach morality? Because I'm personally unaware of where morality is taught outside of a religious institution. And you might think, hey, that's not true. My parents taught me right from wrong, and they are total atheists. Well, like I've said several times, if you really are honest with yourself, your parent was probably a part of a family that was religious just a generation up. Worst case, 2 generations up. And so the trickle-down effect of morality still embedded itself in the family. But look at the weird behavior we've had in the United States in the last at least year. We have police officers that seem to lack morality. We have individuals that respond to that immorality with the same thing, where something should have been done, something concrete should have been done to sort of temper the situation, to address change. And I'm unaware of any official plan. So even though I might be on the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of the voting results from people who are very happy today, I do think mistakes have been made during the last 4 years that could have really tempered people's opinions. Because it's one thing to say, imagine somebody says, your kid. Well, let's say someone else's kid, because you're going to be a victim of the situation if I make it you. But a child has some very simple, affectionate needs from their parent. The thing that they want the most is a hug and someone to say that you're important, I love you, no matter what, I'm always here for you. That's all they want, something that costs nothing. And let's say the kid develops the courage to and the wherewithal to finally mention this to one of their parents. And the parent says, oh yeah? Well, I pay all the bills around here. Those fancy shoes you wanted, I bought you that. That PlayStation, blah, blah, blah. Material objects and bills and blah, blah, blah. So shut up, kid. You don't even know how much I spend every second working for you, thinking about you. And the kid's just sitting there just gobsmacked, like, what the hell's wrong with you? What I wanted from you cost nothing. You could keep all your fancy crap. What I really want's a hug and a word of affection from my parents. So there's two agendas there, isn't there? The kid just wants normal life, man. The human condition to be expressed. The parent has bought all the Kool-Aid and taken this sort of ridiculous righteous thing. And believe me, I heard that crap when I was a kid about the bill thing. It's just funny, man. I had plenty of people around me treat me well, so I didn't have any emotional discourse like that. But our president for the last 4 years could have gone in certain areas and fixed things that mattered to this group of people, this very specific group of people who ended up tremendously against him. But what did he do? He went and fixed a bunch of other stuff that is definitely going to affect them over time, bringing back jobs and getting the taxes all worked, the tariffs worked out and reducing taxes. So in his brain, he's like, I am helping you. I am helping you. Why don't you like me? I am helping you. But the miscalculation, in my opinion, which I've only realized in the last really 3 or 4 days, is he didn't sit them down, listen to them, and regardless if he can understand what they want, try to give it to them. Because I don't think they're asking for anything that's terribly insane. We've also had so much neglect, we actually have a problem on our hands in certain issues. One, like I've mentioned before, a buddy of mine was a former police officer. Actually, I got several of those guys. But one of them mentioned it to me because when this whole thing came up where that infamous day where the person was not able to survive the police attack, I said, what's the deal with the procedures, I said, is it statewide? Is there a national way that our police officers have to behave during the use of force or whatever? And he looked at me and he goes, dude, it's way worse than you think. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, it varies between district within Los Angeles. He goes, if I were to be transferred from one city to another, I got to reread the book. And things that I'm used to doing, things that I have muscle memory to do, are forbidden. And things I would never do are things that I'm supposed to do. He goes, it's all messed up. Sounds like a pretty easy fix to me in terms of at least engaging the problem and saying, look, people who hate me, people who hate this event that occurs every day in the United States, whether, some are justified, some aren't. I hear you, but here's how huge this problem is. Bop, 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 bop. Every county, every district has their own method of dealing with law enforcement. Here's my plan to strike that problem as quickly as humanly possible. Please help me. I need your group to be my agents to go lead the fix. And then when it comes to election day, the dude has a leg to stand on with these people. And that's just one example. We just printed in the United States of America, $2 trillion for aid for this event this year? Okay. How much student loan debt is out there in the United States of America? I don't know, but I wouldn't imagine it would be over $100 billion. Why not, as a gesture to that group who wants to have free education, get that stuff zeroed out or cut it in half or do something? While you're already printing money, why not print money and give it to a good use? That wasn't done. Seems like an easy win. And if you put it up there and you talk to the American people through the television, you say, this is what I'm proposing. And if the other party doesn't help the president, then he can say, look, I'm trying to get this thing passed. Please write your congressman, whatever you got to do to help out. But no, wasn't done. When you have employees, for instance, and many of you do or have in the past, you've got to listen to them. You may not want what they want, but you're not them. You're at the top. You have privilege. You can come and go from your company whenever you want. You want to leave at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go goof off and drink milkshakes for 2 hours, you can do it. They can't because they have to continue working unless you give them that privilege. So you got to balance the perception play field, right? You got to really address their needs. I mean, really impact their lives. It's funny because when my company, I'll give you a really dumb example, but when my company got big enough where we had quite a few people, like almost 30 people on payroll, for my hardcore permanent non-consultants, they wanted healthcare. And what was kind of ironic about it is that my partners and I have been operating without healthcare because, one, we're healthy, but two, we just didn't want to spend that money on it because we didn't have a lot of money at the beginning. But by the time our employees wanted it, we had tons of money in the bank. Tons of money in the bank. And so we went and got some. And we got the best package you could possibly get. We also found out that dental and optical is actually a joke, in America at least. They don't have insurance in those two realms. The only thing they have is escrow. You put a certain amount of money in a bank account every year, and they can withdraw that to do services on their teeth and their eyes. But there is no pay a small premium, and then everybody gets like multiple $1,000 treatments. There's no such thing. It's just a deposit withdrawal model. So we also gave all the employees just incredible deposits. And they were able to keep it over the end of the year. So they could save it up and get their whole mouth redone. It was cool. But it was the employees that drove us to do that. And of course, we obviously immediately thought about it and went, yeah, how dumb that we didn't think about doing this after we got our first $1 million. So as we deal with this era in history, which is, it's epic no matter how you want to categorize this for us today. A good piece of advice came out of one of the conspiracy circles. The gentleman, Joe M. Apparently he's on Gab a lot. And again, Gab doesn't work for me, so I stopped using it. But he said something interesting, which was advice that everybody can take, regardless of how you feel. But it's obviously going to be one group that I think is not so happy today. But he said, look, if you feel really stressed right now, he said, just turn everything off. Meaning, social media, the news, and just walk out back, and breathe the fresh air and just do something fun for you. And I think that's sage advice at this point. There's too many things going around that seem to be sort of disinformation from kind of probably everywhere. Because you'll have people that are excited about finding the truth, let's just say. And so they're trying to relay it to the world as quickly as possible. Some of them have big, giant YouTube channels, or did until recently. And so the problem with that is, the problem that can occur during these situations is that they'll move information too quickly. So they get fed a little honeypot and boom, they blast it out to their listeners, and then they make an ass out of you. So you tell me, in a critical event in your life, I have not found a methodology that makes patience go fast and perception go fast. Now, there's obviously different forms of events. A sporting event, you could just be a fast-minded person. You have really good perception. But for a life event like this, it takes a while to gain a perspective. We don't want it to take a long time, but it does. Now, if it's a life or death situation, that's where we have to take whatever information we have at the point of no return and execute to get out of the situation. Step aside, the train is coming. But let's just say you had the schedule for the train. And at 4 o'clock, it's right where you're standing. So because you have the schedule, guess what? You've got a much better perspective of what standing on the track at 4 o'clock means. You could die. Say, let's not be there at 4. You want to put some pennies on the track to see them get smushed. You're going to have to do that at 3:30. Coming from a train town, we used to put them out 12 hours before the train would arrive. And then finding those pennies later was always a pain in the butt. It is amazing, though, when you see them all smushed. I'll give you another perspective to close off this episode, which might be valuable to you. And some of you have already experienced this, and in fact, some of you have experienced this a lot. So the 2 different examples I'm going to give you goes like this. You got a neighbor who's driving you crazy. Whatever political affiliation they are or life affiliation they are is completely opposite of you. And they're even maybe yelling violent threats at you. And your list of things that you would do to fix that person, to get them out of your life, is one list of things. Probably, let's just say you're a fairly aggressive person. You might have a pretty ridiculous list of things that would put you in jail for the rest of your life. You should never think about. Now, keep the neighbor in column A. Column B is your kid. Boy or girl, doesn't matter. Girls can throw down just as hard as boys in this particular realm, maybe even harder. They're the same thing as your neighbor. Now, in terms of yelling violent threats, I've known some kids to do that. Not very common. But what hurts a parent the most is a lack of love from your child. When you haven't done anything, well, even if you've done something, you even feel worse, right? I did that, my kid doesn't like me, oh my God. Okay. The list of things that you will do for your child is almost the polar opposite of things you would do to your neighbor in your mind in a reactionary sense. You're not thinking things through. Your perception's all wonky. But let's just say that your kid, now I've got a friend of mine that I think is kind of experiencing this. The kids asked the parent, who'd you vote for? One of the kids voted for the same person the parent voted for, and the other kids didn't. And so there is now a divide within the family. And these kids are out of the house, right? They have their own lives. So now the parent has to be patient. These are his offspring. You can't afford to get in a situation with your kid. I mean, if your kid turns into a serial killer and a rapist or whatever, yeah, you're going to probably you should just say that batch just didn't go through properly, or, you weren't a good parent because you were too busy, or whatever happened. It's the choices were theirs, so you don't have to kick yourself too hard. Unless you did that to your kid and they did it to somebody else, then it is probably 100% your creation. But your kid is saying all those acidic things and rejecting you. And you know that over time things tend to mend for most intelligent human beings. But sometimes people hold grudges their whole lives for ridiculous reasons. Again, typically what they do is they pile all the stuff that also sucks in their life into that camp and they blame that person. The classic scapegoating, right? But why is it that we will have patience and work with and understand our own blood sometimes? Again, children are the ones that you really will do anything for. You could disagree with a cousin or a brother, and you can cut those people off, and your life will most likely suffer a little bit, but you'll go on living. But your kids, and that's usually the most intimate family relationship you can have. So what if you bring the two worlds together, getting rid of the list that is the crazy list of things that's reactionary, that lacks your perception, and you afford your neighbor the same sort of understanding that you would give your kid? What choice do you have, man? What choice do you have? I mean, if things went to a violent realm and you got people hurting other people who are innocent simply because they've been brainwashed, yeah, civil wars do occur. That's a sad thing. Everybody loses. America is a ticking time bomb right now. Everybody knows it. Very few people want to admit it, but it's true. It's a ticking time bomb. When does the ignition occur? Regardless of what the outcome is, whenever this thing is completely finalized and goes one way or the other, the bomb goes off. Depending on where you live, and depending on what you believe, and depending on what your neighbors know about you, if you're very, very different from your neighbors, it's probably a good time to go and have a conversation and let them know that you're going to be a peaceful person regardless of how this thing turns out. I mean, that's your first choice, of course. Defending your life is your God-given right. But let's keep on the kid analogy for 1 second. If there is an uprising in the United States of America, as some of us fear might occur, what happens in all wars? People die. Lives are changed forever. And innocent people get attacked. Those people that try to defend their businesses was the guy who was killed in Dallas. He was defending his business, and unfortunately, he reacted too quickly. We can't judge the guy because we don't know what we would do in that situation, but he tried to go into the streets and physically threaten a group of people when he was only one person. And they kicked him to death. This virtuous group taught that they are the peacekeepers of the universe. And of course, the inverse is always true. Happened in Christianity a long time ago as well. Imagine, you're in, you're in Europe in general, in Eurasia, and you hear about this new Roman church that's coming up, and you're thinking, oh, wow, what's that all about? Well, they think this guy died for their sins, and he taught everybody how to be really good to each other. Let me see the book. Let's say they read it, and they're like, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. That guy's pretty amazing. Maybe it's not true. Maybe it is, because they're not from that area. That's the only reason I'm saying that. But they're like, oh, well, I don't think that's going to be a problem, right? And here comes the army. Here comes the crusade. And they are like, what? Who are those people? Well, you know that book I told you about? Yeah, the one where everyone's being really good to each other? The guy in charge gave dozens of examples about how to be good to each other. He washed the prostitute's feet, cured leprosy, brought people back from the dead. All that dude? Yeah, these people think they're representing that guy. They're lobbing a kid's head off with some machete. This has happened all the time. And why? Because man is flawed. It's one thing to be flawed in a maybe, physical way. You're born without something. And then there's being born into a situation where you're abused, as I've kept saying in this episode. Because we have neglected to take care of each other, a bunch of bad things have occurred. Typically, that neglect roots back to a particular concept called greed. In America in the 90s, when everything was falling apart, people were making big money in the 90s. Big money. The problem is that money needed to be reinvested into areas of the world, or areas of the United States, I should say, that would have helped people. Probably the world, but, your backyard better than anyone else, right? But because we kept buying the big TVs and whatever we thought we needed, we neglected this group of people. We neglected our schools. We neglected our government officials. Let a bunch of badness happened. Corporations grew bigger and bigger and stronger. And really, having lived through that era, I can tell anyone who's young, it wasn't even brought up. It was not brought up as an agenda we should even think about. And so sometimes in my brain, I put myself in the shoes of, say, the world leaders. Well, I should say like the people above them. And I wonder if they have conversations where they just look down on them and they go, look at them. They're savages. They don't help each other. But if you ask any one of them, you pull one person out of the crowd and you ask them questions, do you care about other people? Boy, they would profess to the nines that they are so virtuous and all this, but they didn't do it. Some of you have probably been aware your whole life, at least at any point in time when we would think a human being would gain an empathetic bone towards society, you were there. You did what you could do. I had someone tell me once, because I was going to join Peace Corps at one point, because my buddy was about to join Peace Corps. I don't know why I thought this. I think I just wanted to travel the world a little bit. And a buddy of mine was very brilliant and probably at least 15 years my senior. He said, what if I told you? Because he said, look, I had the same thought. And he passed, I think, something someone else said to him. He said, what if I told you you could help them more by making money here and sending it there than you going there and trying to do a job that a lot of other people could do who can't be here making a bunch of money and sending it to them? And so what happened in my life is that when I started making ancillary cash, when I stopped bouncing my checkbook at the bank, which was probably the first 4 years of my life in California, I got some extra money, was doing well. And I called up the Christian Children's Fund, which used to run a bunch of, commercials on TV. Maybe they still do, but I don't watch TV. And I said to them, do you have any kids in America? And I said, oh yeah, totally. All over the place. I said, well, give me a kid from America. How's this thing work? And they said, well, we have a minimum donation, which I think at the time was like $25 a month or something. But they said, you can send more if you want. And so I thought it would just be sending it into a black hole and I wouldn't get any money back or get any correspondence or anything. It was just me putting it into this thing. But lo and behold, it was a little girl in the South. And she started writing me letters. I think she was about 8 when I started. And she'd write me little letters. And, it comes to Christmas time or her birthday or whatever. And she would tell me what she wanted. And it was something simple, like a pair of shoes. And so I think on one particular case, I actually mailed a box of some stuff, not clothing because I didn't know what size she was. But other times I just load her up with a little extra cash. And then her mom would write me a letter and say, you have no idea. And she'd send me a photograph of a little girl wearing the clothes that she said she wanted to kind of prove, hey, we didn't spend this on anything but what we need. And it was an amazing experience. And I think I did that, until she was 18, I think. I mean, she was really close to 18, if not. And of course, she started getting her own work and didn't really need the assistance anymore. But it was an amazing experience. And then, of course, I found out that Christian Children's Fund, as well as a lot of these organizations, confiscate the majority of the money. And that these kids are all in pools. They have several people that sponsor each one of them to make an amount of money that makes any difference. So I was glad that I was able to send money directly to them. We know there's been delusional behavior in the last 4 years in America. Accusations against individuals where we say, you're calling that person a liar. What did they lie about? And they got nothing. You say a person's a racist. Well, how are they a racist? I'm right here, man. You show me someone who's done anything like that in the recent past, meaning that's who they are today, more than likely. And man, we'll all jump off that person's train. Don't even worry about it. And we'll become an advocate like you, whoever that person is saying that story. I think a lot is at stake, as I've said in the last 2 episodes. A lot is at stake. I think the world is at stake. Unfortunately, we don't have time machines. Can't go back and fix things. And so our problem, our challenge at this point is you're sort of dealing with a group of people that really need to learn how to communicate well, that need to provide their own solutions as much as their complaints. I once got bawled out by a guy who made an assumption. And there's that old saying about assuming, right? It happened to him hardcore. I mentioned this one time many, many years ago. But I was working at the TurboTax place. And, again, I'm like the 5th coder that walked in the door. And it was about 2 years into the company, if not 3. And we'd hired a crack team to come in and help fix our Windows version, which I only drew stuff for. I didn't program on that one. And they were just making amazing inroads. And I don't know how it happened, but I ended up talking to one of these guys who I still know to this day. And I was complaining about our software behaving badly and how we could, well, I didn't actually, I was complaining about one thing, I think. And anyway, he lectured me immediately and he says, look, man, don't be just the guy that walks around complaining about things. Be the guy that fixes them. Because you're of no value to me, just complaining. And apparently he'd been enduring a lot of this kind of comments from other people too. But his best friend was my boss. And so he goes back and complains to my boss that I'm one of those kind of guys. And my boss just laughed and he goes, dude, you have no idea who you're talking to. Because that kid's fixing everything as well as you. So we actually formed a crack team together. It was really funny. Outside of business. But anyway. Have patience. If you're suffering right now because of the frustrating results in America, or you're concerned, or you're afraid, or whatever, just realize that every day that goes by, we gain more perspective of what's really going on in the world. The other thing I need to remind you and myself from time to time is there are multiple ways to solve a problem. There's just, well, when you see a way that you think is going to be way easier than all the other ways, you want that one to engage. But there are other ways. I think that, we're definitely in a situation where I think we've just empowered a very dark force that potentially could scorch the earth so fast that whatever second methodology might come up to improve the world, it's going to have a really quick execution time. And obviously, if anything gets rough in the world, militant in the world, you're talking about a slow solution, potentially. Especially if it's us. The citizen against citizen, that's just going to get nasty. One of the things you can gain from Twilight Zones, and there's probably at least half a dozen of them out of the 190 that were made, is they have episodes about the Civil War. People time traveling back to the Civil War, episodes in the Civil War, as well as one with Sulu. Was it George Takei or Takai? Someone was saying his name wrong. I can't remember which way he prefers to be called. But he was in an episode, and he played, I'll just mention this one episode, and then I'll shut up and end the episode. He was a gardener. Very young, a really young Sulu. It was amazing, probably 1964 or so. And he shows up to this white guy's place. So he's Japanese. And he's asking the guy if he wants his lawn mowed. And the guy upstairs is probably about 50. And he was going through his attic and going through his World War II souvenirs and had found a samurai sword which was a very traditional trophy that soldiers would bring home from Okinawa or any place they raided. It was revered, as I understand in real life, it's revered for a while, and now it's sort of like elephant tusks. You're not to have these things in your house. You should return it to some sort of organization that will put it in a museum, you know. But the way that this worked was that George comes up, and the guy's like this drunk kind of guy, and he's just wanting to like confirm how much money, $7 a month to mow the lawn. It's the 60s, right? The guy agrees. Then he says, come up and have a beer with me. And the dude was, you know, immediately like, you know, do you speak Japanese? I got this samurai sword. It's got some writing on it. Maybe you should translate it for me. And the dude's like, look, man, I was born here. I don't speak another language besides English. And magically, he could read this sword. And when he touched the sword, he kind of gained the spirit of the person who owned the sword, and they end up having this huge fight, and I won't ruin the ending for you. But it was that old paradigm of if you ever create a war, it leaves a mark. The Civil War episodes were, the professor from Gilligan's Island gets teleported back from a gentleman's club. When he goes out the door from the gentleman's club, he's teleported back to the day that Lincoln is going to be shot at the theater. And he has to quickly find a place to live, and he's trying to figure out where he is and what's going on. He eventually figures out I'm on the day of this event, and he has to warn the police, and no one will listen to him. But when he tries to gain some room and board, the woman renting the place wanted to know whether he was a Yankee or Confederate. And the way that he answered the question was to look around the room real quick to see what memorabilia she had in the room so he could pick the right answer. I forget which one he said. I'm sure it's a Yankee. Maybe he was Confederate, I don't know. Can't remember the territory where he was shot. But it leaves a mark. So if we ever let it get out of control, then you might have permanent scars in your family, in your friend circles, for the rest of your life to haunt you. In effect, if you think that you were on the right side and maybe you even win the dispute, in the end, you may have people that would enrich your life that you're never going to talk to again because you let it get to you. It definitely got to them. So it's sort of like take a deep breath, count to whatever, realize that we can't escape the earth yet, aside from death. If you do believe in God, then it might be a good time to review your belief in God as to, you know, what if I had God right here to my side and we're doing an interview and God's not talking in riddles, he's talking straight talk or she's talking in straight talk. If I ask God a question about this situation, I'm willing to bet that 98% of you would guess God's answer accurately. I mean, forget all indoctrinations of what God might be. Just if you envision God to be a fairly omnipotent, patient being, I bet we could guess. So use that as a tool. Your built-in Ethernet cable to the GOD might be very useful right now. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. I have not, as of this episode, spruced it up with the new theme. I've got some ideas. I'm still mulling them around. But eventually get Brandon here before the end of the year. Everything will go blue. We have 2 video, 2 audio, 2 social media. Oh, we kept it all like unified there. We have an all-new remastered season 1. There's about 127 subscribers over there. There's about 100 and some odd episodes over there. And if anything's missing from over there, which I don't think there is, gun control was taken down by YouTube. So you can find it over on BitChute. But if you go to the website, I swapped the URL so you don't have to search for anything. We also have a couple ways of donating to the show, which is PayPal and Patreon. You know, I hope that you guys appreciate that I don't load up the episodes at the very beginning. I'm so sick and tired of tuning into channels, especially ones that have, just goofy videos. And man, you have to listen to like the 5-minute bumper at the beginning about how you're supposed to contribute. Oh, and buy a bunch of like rations for the apocalypse with some doomsday story. Watch it all come true. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.